Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cassandra Lunch number 63. Today, we have our CEO, Rahul Singh, presenting on a live demo how to install Cassandra 4.0 using a Tarball on a Linux system. So looking forward to learning about Cassandra 4.0 and seeing the installation process. Your co-organizers for this event are Rahul Singh, Arpin Patel, and myself. And we are always looking for guest speakers and sponsors. So if you or someone you know would be interested in presenting on something they know about Cassandra or something that surrounds the Cassandra ecosystem, definitely feel free to reach out to mainly either Arpin or myself at this point to get into contact with us about presenting on a topic. Or if you know someone who would want to sponsor an event like this, you can get yourself some advertisement on our YouTube channel, as well as if we have in-person meetups, sponsors tend to provide things like food and drink. Hopefully we can get back to that soon. We are a part of a larger community, Data Community DC, and we do believe in a inclusive and diverse culture. So regardless of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, everyone's treated equally with respect here. Some of the other organizations associated with Data Community DC are displayed here, and you can find out more at Data Community DC's blog, as well as any other events that they may put on. So what we cover here, we cover everything related to Cassandra and the Cassandra ecosystem. So we'll cover topics such as Spark and Kafka here as well, and including DataStax Enterprise. So everything Cassandra we cover here. At this point in the chat, or at this point in the intro, we do like to open it up for anyone who has announcements. Doesn't seem like it, so we'll move on. Group rules, if you have a question, you can ask it. Be polite and courteous to others, and this is meant to be a discussion, so definitely chime in and share what you know if you have some more in-depth knowledge on what's being discussed. Here tonight, we deal with real-time data platforms, as well as big data, so we work with Cassandra quite a bit. We are the experts there. DataStax is also a partner. And they have the enterprise version of Cassandra. So happy to have them as sponsors as well. GW University, when things get back to normal, hopefully will allow us to use their facilities once again. So they've also been a great sponsor for us. And some of the other sponsors are listed here, and you could get yourself some advertising if you're interested in sponsoring. And some of the organizational sponsors to Data Community DC. Oh, excuse me. I believe I said 15 seconds announcements before. These are here, but since no one had one, we'll just move on. We have our own announcement. Anant is hiring for data platform operators, engineers, and architects. Full or part-time positions are available, as well as being remote. Some upcoming events. We have every Monday we have Data Engineers Lunch at noon. That's kind of like a sister meetup to this one. But some of the topics upcoming is we're going to have Cassandra for .NET developers, Spark Cassandra connector pushdown, and using dbeaver with Cassandra. If you have attended or watched some of our other recent videos, there was a little bit of a shakeup in the schedule, but yeah, these are the upcoming events. You can always find out more at anant.us/events. And all of these videos and meetups are recorded and posted to YouTube, usually a couple days after the fact. So definitely check out our YouTube channel at it's YouTube/AnantCorp. And Cassandra.Link is your #1 resource for anything related to Cassandra. So if you have a question, chances are we've talked about it or have an article linked here about that particular topic. You can see Spark, Kafka, in addition to Cassandra, are listed here as things you can look up and improve your knowledge about the Cassandra ecosystem. And with that, I will pass it off to Rahul, and we can learn how to install from a Tarball.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are today. Today, I'm just going to walk through installation of Cassandra 4 because it's general availability now, and I don't think we've ever really done a session on how to install it from the Tarball, why we would want to install it from a Tarball, what's the benefits of it, and we'll do a kind of a live walkthrough. Just full caveat, I'm going to just do it directly reading the instructions, and it's kind of like a test of the Cassandra docs to see if they're actually, they work. They should. But installing a Tarball may seem daunting for folks, but it's really not. That's what I want everybody to see, is that it's not that much more different than if you were installing a, let's say, Mongo or MySQL from a Tarball. Normally people don't do that, but it's not that much different. So just kind of walking through, and you guys can see my screen, right? The presentation.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, great. So what I'll talk about today is using Tarball, which is basically another fancy Linux word for zip file. Using a zip file, using a Tarball, how do we install it on Linux? And technically, you can use the same exact method to do it on Mac, any Unix operating system that has Java or Python, and you can try it on Windows without Windows subsystem for Linux, but people have mixed luck with that. Our company, as Josh mentioned, we create and manage global platforms around Spark, Cassandra, and Kafka. DataStax, being a partner, helps us do that with at least 2 of those. What is an architect? Well, it's a chief builder, or as a verb, it means to design or make. So we create and manage global platforms that run on Cassandra-related technology. So we're architects in the space of Cassandra. We love scalable, fast data, and with and without commercial partners, depending on complexity. At the end of the day, open source is the name of the game for us, and more specifically, I would say it's cloud neutral. So we like to use technologies that are cloud neutral, whether it's commercially supported or not helps. So, anyways, to get into this right away, why Tarball? Why should we use a zip file to install software that already has a package that somebody else has created? If you're a Linux user or if you're a Mac user, you say homebrew install X and it'll just install something for you. Or on Red Hat, you say yum install, or on Debian you use apt-get and you install a Debian package using that way. So this is a good question. People always ask this question if they don't understand the Tarball. It's usually because they haven't really used Cassandra in a production environment. So there's lots of different ways to install Cassandra. RPM is a package format. Debian is a package format. apt is a way to install Debian packages. Yum is a way to install RPM packages. Tarball is a format of it's a compressed zip file. And then Docker isn't really a packaging format, although technically, I guess you can package the installation in an image using any of those. You can make a Docker image using a Tarball. You can make a Docker image using an apt-based installation or an RPM Yum-based installation. So as more and more people use Docker, knowing why you should use one of these is actually very relevant, right? You don't really escape that question. And even if you do use a pre-built Cassandra image, you may want to look at that Docker file to say how they installed it, because you might want to know where they're keeping configurations if you're going to override any configurations in the Docker image. So I have nothing against package installations. It's great. again, if you're all bought into the package management system, especially if you have an enterprise, you may have your own Yum or RPM or Debian repositories on something like Nexus. And that's great because you can control the packages that way, right? And it's easy, right? Installing Cassandra using apt or Yum is fairly easy. You don't have control over essentially where the things go, but you rely on it taking care of dependencies. Sometimes you rely on it in terms of updates and upgrades, and it works. It's just if you want a little bit more control, you don't want to use RPM or Debian. Although in the DataStax world, when we use DataStax packages, it's fairly fine-grained, and it's because it has a couple of different packages associated with DataStax. You can use RPM or Debian, and actually using the lifecycle manager, it all takes care of that process for you. But Tarball has its acquired taste, I would say. And like from an installation perspective, I mean, it's like one or two more commands than an RPM or Debian based update installation. So if you know what you're doing, it's great. It's actually pretty good if you don't know what you're doing, because then you'll learn how to do it. It's also great if you don't have root access, right? A lot of places you're going to be in an environment, at least I'm definitely aware of some on the client side where I'm not the root administrator, right? I'm just a user, and I may have a service account, or I may have a user and I'm not root, and I can't really install things. So Tarball is kind of the way to do it. If I want to be able to switch between versions of Cassandra very easily, this is like on a flip of a coin. This is pretty much the only way to go. Otherwise, I guess you can use Docker as well. And I'll get into that in a second. How is that possible, right? Yeah, so no general downsides. You can't just do yum update, right? It's not going to just update the packages for you. You have to do that on your own. So any questions so far? Oh, okay, great. So what do you need to install Cassandra? Not much. You need to have Java and Python. And to install it using a tarball, it's like basically 2 commands, although I like to put stuff in the OPT directory in Linux. And also this should technically work if you replaced curl with like whatever the PowerShell equivalent is, or if you have curl installed. You can probably do this in Windows if you have like an untar tool. I have not done it in a while. There was a long time ago, maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, I had DataStax and Cassandra running on Windows using Java. But generally, I would say don't try to do it. There are some there is something on DataStax's lab site which you just install, like DataStax for Windows, or I don't know what they call it, but I think it basically runs it inside a VM for you. So if you're trying to do it on Windows without Windows system subsystem for Linux, you're wasting your time, because you're never going to run Cassandra on Windows directly. You're going to run it on Linux, or you're going to run it on Linux. So this command I'll come back to, and I'm going to run it for us. But that's it. That's the only difference. Like if you were to install it using a package manager, it's like, I think it's the difference is I'm trying to see what it is. Yeah, so like on Debian, you just say, apt-get install Cassandra, and it'll install it for you, right? On RPM, it's yum install Cassandra. Versus when we're in the Tarball world, we're doing a little bit more in terms of configuration, but it's not that much different. It's like a couple more lines of code of shell commands. When you unzip or untar Cassandra, it has everything in here. If you do a package installation, It'll put the configuration files in one place. It'll put the logs in one place. It'll put the binaries in another place. It keeps track of it, but it puts it in different places on the file system, right? When you do it with a Tarball installation, it literally has everything in one folder. So you can then have another Tarball for the next version up or the next version down, right? Technically, you can stop one instance of it and then run the other one, and it won't really interfere. But if you've done a Yum installation or a Debian installation, like there's a current version that's running on that machine, right? You're either running that version or you're not, right? But with the Tarball, you can turn one off and turn one on. So with that, if you decided to, you could move the data directory right here in the logs directory outside of the Tarball installation and configure the Tarball installation to use those other directories. Why would you want to do that? Well, you could run Cassandra 4.0.0 on that data and on that log directory, and it will come up using the configuration that's here, right? And let's say everything is fine, but a new patch release comes out and you want to try it out. You want to try it out with existing data. Well, you can turn off 4.0.0 and configure 4.0.1 to use those data directories, and it will just come back up. The way that Cassandra runs is the only state or changes it has to the file system other than the actual distribution are a few files, configuration files, and the data. The logs are, it's trash, right? Like you don't really care about the logs after it's up and running. But that's why Tarball installation is very powerful, is that you know where everything is. You can have 50 versions of Cassandra untarred on your file system, and you can run one at a time. And people are like, well, why would you want to do that? Just because you can doesn't mean you should be doing something, right? So I'll give you a real good example. There's a cluster with 1,000 nodes, like physical computers, right? And we need to do an upgrade. And we need to be very careful that the upgrade doesn't fail, right? And if it does fail, we want to be able to go back fairly quickly. So we have the data in a shared area, meaning both versions could essentially use it, right? And the startup commands, they are aliased. And in Linux and in Macs and even on Windows, you can do what's called a link directory or link, right? So the command to start and stop are directly linked to version 1. And we start it up, everything's fine. And if we want to upgrade, all we say is link the alias to version 2. And then when we start it uses version 2. And we did a canary test. We started it up on 20% of the servers or 10% of the servers, and the patch version worked fine. So then we were able to go ahead and run the automation on the rest of the servers. Now, if that patch version didn't work, we could just shut it down and have the data. If it had messed it with any of the data, we could have it backed up, or we could just say, run version 1 again, right? So that's where directory structure, knowing the directory structure is very important. Data conf, we'll get into this in a second, but that's the reason why you use Tarball installation. Well, how do we start Cassandra? Once you've untarred it, you just go ahead and start bin/Cassandra. And if you want to see what's happening, you can tail the log, and we'll do that. And once it's up, let's say system ready, you can run node tool, or we can run CQLSH to really go into the database. We're going to start Cassandra as is without making any configurations, and then we're going to go into it and make some changes. The conf directory, there's about 3 files that you should know about. 2 of them, there's probably 2 that you really care about if you're just starting off. One is Cassandra YAML and Cassandra rack DC properties. Cassandra envsh is kind of more pro-grade. You need to make any changes for the JVM, turn on garbage collection, logging, tune the garbage collection, switch the garbage collector. But at the end of the day, that's, probably don't want to be messing with that when you're first starting off. But when we want to change the name of the cluster, we have to do that here, right? And when we have more than one computer, we're going to have to give some seeds and the listen address if you want to really have a proper production network. But you can start it off with the one node without any changes, and everything is fine. Again, I'm just doing this on a physical server. I'm remoting into it. I'm not really going to make a multiple node cluster right now, so I don't have to really worry about ports. But if we're going to make a cluster, which we'll do in a subsequent session, we'll have to make sure the ports are open. So configuration in terms of other than this, right? The only other thing that we may change is the directories, right? If we move the data out of the data directory and put it in elsewhere so that it could be, I don't know, on a different drive, for example, which is common, right? You're going to have your binaries on one folder, one drive mounted, and you may have your data in another folder. In fact, we may want to have the data in one drive, the commit logs in another drive, and the saved caches and hints, those can probably stay on the same drive. Why? Because the way Cassandra works, data comes in, it gets written to commit logs, and it gets written to the data file directories. There's a lot of read writes happening on both of these. So if we want to make this very performant, we would separate these out. So, by the way, you can do this with an RPM installation, with a Debian installation, right? It's just that it's an after the fact configuration. In here, we can do that from the get-go. So that's just kind of the explanation of the flow of how to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my my machine so that we're ready to go here. In the meantime, any questions about Tarball installations?
Do the other installation methods, Docker, Package Manager, exist for Cassandra 4.0?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Do the other installation methods that we talked about exist for Cassandra 4.0?
Yeah, yep, they do. And I'll maybe do an RPM and a DPM one later. But yeah, absolutely. The Cassandra 4 is probably the, well, I would think it's maybe Cassandra 3.11 was like this too. Cassandra 4 is one of the first versions in a long time that the release process and the documentation was well managed. And partially, I think it's because DataStax came back and started to donate resources to the community from like a PR perspective, from a documentation perspective. So yeah, they've got their shit together. In fact, what I'm showing you is literally commands from the install page. And I have it open on one screen here while I'm going to be doing it on my desktop here. So let me go ahead and share. Any other questions?
I just had a question about what release features in Cassandra 4.0 are like will have the biggest impact, do you think, or are the ones you're most excited about?
Yeah, I can go through them. I think I've gone through them before, but the ones that stick out that so there's two aspects. One is administrative and the other is kind of developer, right? Architects kind of have to know both. So from an administrative perspective, operations perspective, there are things like improvements to the messaging engine and the streaming engine because they changed the underlying networking using something called Netty, different from the Java native IO. And then audit logging and full query logging are kind of parts of Cassandra. Where before you had to kind of make some changes, put in, I think it was like Ericsson Mobile had a good audit plugin, for example, right? From a developer perspective, there's something called transient replication. And transient replication allows us to have, versions of data around that. So there's main replicates where like if you have a replication factor of 3, it will make sure that that data is there in those three replicas, but you have the potential of having up to like, I don't know, 5 transient replicas, meaning they're around and you can store them, they're ephemeral. What does that do for us? Well, if you have a very, very high transaction system where data is getting written to very fast, and it's data that's getting read from extremely fast for multiple transactions, then the transient replicas can serve up many more requests. So you can have 3 replicas and you have 50 transient replicas. And that basically introduces inside Cassandra another level of cache to make it the system of record. Like you don't have to have another cache outside of Cassandra. And another one is kind of in the middle, I would say, virtual tables. So virtual tables are a new concept in Cassandra 4. A lot of the configuration and the metrics of Cassandra, the only way to get it is using GMX, or as Sarma showed last week, I think it was last week, the using the node exporter and turning on the metrics logging, right? That we could put it to a file and then you would be able to get it. Well, in Cassandra 4, a lot of the data is actually available in tables. It's not a table that you can drop or delete or change, but it's a table that represents that same information in real time. So, we have our table analyzer. Technically, we could forego the whole node tool table stats and the pivot. We can just say select star from these tables and dump it from each machine, for example. So you can manipulate, you can look at metrics using CQL. And I think the final one is probably that it's, uses some of the cool features from Java 11. Still kind of, experimental in a sense, but it's, Java 11 is better than Java 8. So we'll see how that performance-wise it works. That's in a nutshell. There's probably tons and tons of things in the release notes that I have not read. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Great. All right. So Cassandra 4 on, we're going to be using a Linux Mint machine, which is basically based on Ubuntu. And all I've done here is, log in. I'm just in the /opt directory. This is the only thing different than what they're showing on the documentation page for like how to install Cassandra, right? And I'm going to do exactly what they're suggesting. So I'm going to check to make sure I have Java, right? So we need to have Java 8 or above. Okay, so I've got Java 11. All right, I'm going to be fine. Then we need to have Python. I've got 2.7. It said you need to have 2.7. So I've got the prerequisites. And that's it. That's all I need to have. So I'm going to go ahead and download it. And I have curl installed, although you can use wget as well. But I'm just going to paste the command, and this is not that bad. 44 megs, pretty quick. Let's see how big it is. Oh, no, permission denied. Oh, because I'm not root. So here. I don't have to be root, but in fact, I'm going to prove that I don't have to be root. I'm just going to do it inside my own directory here. All right, so there we go. Okay, so I've got this downloaded. This is the tarball. What is a tarball? Does anybody know? I know what it is. Does anybody know what tar stands for? Tar stands for tape archive. So back in the day, backups were done on tape drives. And so a tarball would be taking everything, making a tape archive. Could be that it's broken up into different tape archives. So you have a tape archive broken up into different parts. Nowadays, nobody has tape archives anymore. But the other aspect of tarball is that it's using GZ, which is GNU zip, which is not exactly zip, but it's a compression format. So when we say tar C or XVFZ, what we're saying is we're extracting it. We want it to be verbose, and we want it to be using the Z as well, meaning the compression aspect of it as well. If I just did XVF, then it wouldn't unzip it for me. So let's see. All right, so that's the tarball. And so you can imagine I can have different downloads of Apache here, kind of coexisting. And I could even link, let's say, like latest, or I can link like Cassandra to one of these directories if I wanted to. So I'm not going to do any of that today. Go inside Apache Cassandra 4. Here's the directory structure, and I'm going to actually open it up inside the browser so you can see. Right, so we got our bin, got all our binaries installed here, got our configuration files. Again, we're only really messing with Cassandra NV, Cassandra YAML, maybe Cassandra RACDC properties. They have the full CQL documentation here, if you're curious. The libraries folder is where, and it's a Java application, right? So it has all of these supporting dependencies for what it needs for to run. Some Python libraries, because the CQL sh command is basically a Python application talking to Cassandra. And then here we have our Cassandra stress tool. When it has some other tools like sstable dump, sstable offline rebuild, sstable split. These are offline tools that we would use. And so that's separated from the online tools. So this is, if you notice also, there's no data directory here and there's no logs directory here. Why is that? Well, we haven't run Cassandra yet. And so when Cassandra runs for the very first time, it bootstraps itself. It creates its tables to run itself, right? So the first node has to come up and it says, okay, I'm now alive. So when the new nodes come, they talk to that first one and then they start to replicate that data. But at the very, very beginning, there's no data directory, there's no logs directory because, well, frankly, it hasn't ever started yet. So if I just say bin/Cassandra, and I'm going to actually open another tab. Right. And since there's no log directory, I can't really tail any log files. But when I start bin Cassandra, you'll see that the logs directory got created, right? And the data directory now got created. And so if I do a tail -f logs system log, right? It's just showing what's happening. Now, it's bootstrapping. You have to give it a little bit of time because what it's doing in here is it created its commit logs. It created the hidden folder, created the saved caches. It's creating its schema to run itself, right? It's doing all of this in real time. All the tables that run Cassandra run on Cassandra tables, right? So it has to recreate all that stuff because it doesn't have anything right now. And it says it's now normal, right? This is what we're waiting for. State is now normal. So if we control this, control C and say no tool status, no tool is not going to work because we don't have the path set up. So we're going to say bin/no tool status. And we're up. We're up and running. and to test out CQLSH. We're up and running, right? Cassandra 4.0. So I was talking about those virtual tables, right? So these are the different key spaces that are on Cassandra, right? And the virtual tables, as I was talking about, they represent things inside Cassandra that are live, right? So there's basically Cassandra virtual schema, and there's also system virtual schema and system views. So if I use system virtual my VNC, my remote machine is acting up. Okay, I think it's fine now. Virtual schema. No, typo. And say there's three tables here, so we can say select star from key spaces, and just shows us what are the key spaces available. Right now I don't have anything in here except for the virtual key spaces, virtual tables, and the thing that runs Cassandra. There's nothing really here. You can take a look at the tables. Here are all the tables available to us. So now inside system views, let's say I want to see the SS table tasks or the thread pools, right? Or local read latency, which probably there isn't any recorded yet, but we can just go ahead and see it, or even max partition size, right? So you can say select star from system_views dot max partition size. And there it is, right? Very quickly was able to tell us what's the max partition bytes without us having to do a table stat. So that's a virtual table that's now in here. It's not everything that we may want from table stats, but it's kind of cool to see what's here. Disk usage. Oh, this also shows us the current settings, right? This is what's in Cassandra YAML. And I'm not sure if we can save it here. I don't think we could, but I'm not going to try. Yeah, you can do updates on these tables. So system views dot settings. System underscore views dot. Do I have another typo here? Maybe I do. I'll start again. Try another one. Oh, I had a goober error here. I did not put from. I'm just gonna paste that here. So all the settings that are in YAML, right? If you wanted to see what those were, are all here. Why is that useful? Well, if we want to compare all the settings across all the nodes, normally what we have to do is to go grab the Cassandra YAML file and copy it somewhere and do a diff. But with this, we could programmatically connect to each server and do a select from this, and then do a programmatic check to see if everything's the same. So yeah, it's not going to be apparent for most new people, like why this is a big deal. But from an administrative perspective, if in the future we could even make changes via CQL, then it's a matter of making the deployment and configuration of Cassandra much more dynamic especially from like the Kubernetes world. So we'll see. Stay tuned in terms of what that will do for us. I had other ideas for virtual key spaces and schemas where you could represent outside data inside a virtual key space or a virtual table. And most people don't know why. I think it would be useful is that in one Cassandra cluster, you can have Cassandra native data and maybe even relational data represented. And it would, obviously fetch it from the other place, but it would give the same kind of pane of glass to all that information. So now Cassandra's up and running, right? And what I'm going to do now is quit, right? So if I come back and do this, right, it's the cluster name is just test cluster. So people ask me like, how do you change the name of the cluster, right? And that's the only thing I'm going to change today. Well, first of all, you have to get out of Cassandra. You have to stop Cassandra. And so people, again, another question is, well, how do you stop Cassandra? I could technically just do Control C here, but like normally you would be running Cassandra and be running in the background, right? So one of the things that you don't get in a tarball is like sudo service stop, right? To stop the Cassandra service or start the Cassandra service. So the way you kind of stop Cassandra is you find the PID process ID and you just give it that. And it should basically stop this. If it didn't, I don't know why. All right, yeah. So now if we say, PS, okay, there's no Cassandra running. There's no Java process running. So I want to make a change to the cluster name. I don't think I have code here. So I'll just open it up in VI. So inside the conf directory, I'm going to go to Cassandra YAML. And I can change the cluster name here. Let's say all right. When you make a change to the cluster name, you change the whole nature of the cluster. And so basically, and if there was other databases, that you had, technically you would take a backup of it. But the easiest way to like change the name is really to just start fresh. Like you would have to go and do it on each of them. So I'm gonna start it off. I'm gonna start Cassandra and just show what's happening after I made that change. Right? It's giving me errors saying I've saved this test cluster, but the new thing is called platform database. And you know what? This is going to continue giving us problems until we basically clean house. Right? It's not going to come up, right? This is the error. It's done. Thank you. Goodbye. Right? So how do we fix this? Unfortunately, the best and only way to do this is to just remove the data directories. You go into data, right? You have to kind of remove everything. So I don't really see anything here that's of use. I'm just going to go ahead and remove the data directory. And so now when we start it up, it's a fresh installation. Right? All the state and the system is inside the data directory. And that's it. That's installing Cassandra, changing the cluster name, and it's good to go. Any questions?
So if you wanted to rename your cluster, you'd have to back up your data and then reload it back into Cassandra, at least like from this Tarball type installation.
Not necessarily. I mean, the same after you run Cassandra, all the operations are the same, right? Installing and configuring initially is different, but everything else you do exactly the same. So if you want to rename it in a bin, like a DBN or RPM, same thing.
Mhm.
Right? Doesn't really change that. Yeah, you don't change the cluster name. If you need to, you have to be like, why is it so important? Well, because I mistakenly called it test cluster. Well, you shouldn't have any data in a system called test cluster. That's your mistake. Go start fresh. Any other questions?
Do you know if access to the virtual tables can be done through drivers, or is it like described where you need to actually be using CQLSH?
I'm fairly sure you can access it. Yeah. You should, yeah, there's no reason why it's CQL. You can do select on it from other places. Other questions? Okay, cool. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we will call it a day. Good session, and we'll get this out on YouTube and blog post, and stay tuned for the next one. Maybe I'll do one with DBN RPM to show kind of how it's different. All right. Thanks, guys. See you all soon.
Thanks, Raul.
You mean one announceable is not required?